And I would like to officially welcome everyone to our first instructional instructional technology workshop this semester. Today, we're going to be talking about the same thing that everybody's talking about, which is ChatGPT. And in doing so, we're going to try to do a couple things today. We will continue our conversation from the previous week, where we started addressing the role of the ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence technologies could have in the language classroom. Today, we're going to take a closer look at how we may possibly integrate ChatGPT into foreign language classroom in general, and perhaps more specifically in the context of written tasks, written assessments, and written assignments. I would like to preface this by saying that this is, this is new, even though the technology behind it is not that new anymore. We are still in the community here, but also in various other communities around the country and the world, trying to figure out how to approach this, how to address this. Some of the things that, this workshop will not be will not provide a definitive answer to your questions, maybe some of the questions. And, it is our hope that it will also raise some productive questions and lead to some good discussion. So, a calculator for writing is the title of this workshop, and it will become more apparent later, but why that is the case. As I am going through the initial 2 slides of this presentation, I would like all the participants to go to chat.openai.com and create an account with that platform. Again, it is chat.openai.com. And as you are working on that, I will just go ahead and really quickly recapture some of the things that we talked about last Friday. So ChatGPT is out there. Artificial intelligence is out there. There is no way to stop it. The cat is out of the bag. Just like we can't put toothpaste back in the tube, we cannot unreveal ChatGPT, which begs the questions: how do we deal with it? What do we do with it? And some of the things that we discussed last week was whether we should follow the instinct, the first instinct in many instances, and just ban it wholesale. And one of the things that we mentioned last week was, okay, well, we tried that, or many of us have tried that in around 2007 with Wikipedia. That doesn't work. Or that didn't work. When it comes to, in general, forbidding these kinds of technologies in the classroom, one should think about the consequences that may have for students with disabilities, but also consequences for equitable teaching. And I'm not going to go into these 2 sort of broad categories of issues. I will let you guys explore them on your own. So, if we all agree that banning it is not the way to go, the next question is, okay, well, should we police it? That may be perhaps, another response to ChatGPT. And, there are a few ways to do it. And I took the liberty to list them here. I will send a copy of this presentation so you can click on the hyperlinked tools and see for yourself and experiment maybe. We can use various detection tools that allow us to recognize the text that is generated by robots. They are not fail-safe. There are problems with it, but in general, they do work and they do become better. We can also analyze our student texts for all sorts of similarities. And by that, I mean just, comparing various compositions that students may have produced and see how similar they are. And, if they are similar at a certain threshold, then chances are, okay, well, they may have been generated instead of composed. No matter how we look at this question, whether we should police it or not, or these policing techniques, it's and this is something that has also come up last week. It's going to end up more of like a whack-a-mole exercise. Once we solve one problem or stop one problem, something else is going to come up. And it will, turn into this never-ending cycle of playing catch up with our students. The question now is, of course, do we want it in our class? What kind of effect will that have on the atmosphere in our classrooms? And whether this is something that we would like to follow. Chances are the answer is no. I see that Diana has her hand up.
Thanks, Simon. I'm just checking. So it asks for our phone number to create an account.
It shouldn't have to.
Okay, so maybe I went to the wrong. Okay, just verifying before I give up my.
No, it did ask for a phone number as well.
It does.
Right.
Verify the phone number.
Yes,
I think it's a new additional step. If someone has created the account before, they didn't, but now they do.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for bringing it up, Nicholas. So yeah, it's definitely a new thing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Annoying.
Okay. Since we are sort of pausing here, let me see. Okay, nothing. No other questions in the chat. Very good. Okay, so where were we? Whack-a-mole. Policing, also probably not a good response to this technology. So, we then need to be able to integrate it. We need to be able to think about holistically. We need to be able to figure out a way in which this could work with what we do in the class, with our practice, with our students. And I think, and there's a couple of ways to go about that, and we're sort of going to try to run through them from the most to, or from the least to most complex. And so again, let's explore how to do it. And here, for sake of reminder, I input the link one more time. So here I'm going to switch over to ChatGPT, which I have open right here. One of the things that we can consider doing right away is paying attention to how we structure our composition prompts. ChatGPT in general, it does not contain the personal information of your students. So if we can figure out a way to sort of personalize our prompts, that is something that may allow us to, may give us the space to integrate it a little bit more in our classes, in our practice. And so let me really quickly demonstrate what I mean by that. I've prepared a couple prompts here, and here I'm just going to copy and paste one into the box. Last week we started by talking about sandwiches, so I figured, why not continue with it? So let's see what happens if we ask the robots to tell us to write a short paragraph on how to make a sandwich. And all right, an error occurred. Great. Okay, that's going to happen. Okay. Let me try it again. And off it goes. Before we know it, it is going to generate a perfectly acceptable response to making a sandwich. A couple sentences, a paragraph. It is something that, our students, given that particular prompt or a prompt like that, could use in their class. But if we were to just tweak it a little bit and, make it a little bit more personal, such that instead of asking it for a sandwich in general, why don't we ask it to write a short paragraph on how I make my favorite sandwich? And let's just see what happens here. Interesting. Okay, I ran this literally 2 hours ago, and it gave me something completely different. Just try that. Okay, here we go. This is more of an answer that I got. Okay, so we see right away that as a language model, I don't have the information about your personal preferences, experiences, right? So as soon as we start incorporating things that would require our students to give something of their own, it's going to hit the wall. This is also true for anything that happened after year 2021. So for instance, if we were to ask our students a personal question to describe something that, I know, happened to them in 2022, the model will not know it. Its memory only goes to 2021, right? So things like that, but those are relatively simple tricks to, you know, immediately sort of take what we already have and think about how we can repurpose, how we can personalize these things. But let us, you know, go maybe a little bit farther. And sorry, in case the ChatGPT didn't work, I have everything also screenshot here. Let's move on to a sort of more advanced activity that forces us to start rethinking what it is that we are doing in terms of our activities. For this particular activity, what I would like to do is I would like to split everyone into breakout rooms and give you a couple minutes, let's say 5, to talk about how one makes a good sandwich. Okay, so simple question. You don't need to use, actually, I don't want you to use the robots to give you an answer to this. You know, just talk about it. And perhaps also, you know, think about it from the angle of, should you pose a prompt like that to your students? What kind of answer are you expecting from them? And maybe even why would you want to pose a prompt like that? So I'm going to go ahead and let's go into breakout rooms. And there are 17 of us, so let's do 6 breakout rooms. Okay, and we will assign people automatically, and let's give it 5 minutes. So again, the question is, how does one make a good sandwich? All right, welcome everybody. So hopefully you all discuss your own collective approaches to sandwich making. As you were working, as you were chatting in your groups, I asked ChatGPT to figure out, to give us a procedure for how does one make, for making a good sandwich. I asked the question, how does one make a good sandwich? And here's what it generated. With this in front of you, and hold on a second, there's something that's in the chat here. Yes, it automatically recognizes the language that you write in, absolutely. So with this in front of you and having discussed what you discussed, how is this what you see? How is the response of the chat different from what you came up with? And perhaps more importantly, when you were discussing making a sandwich, what was the process? What were the kind of things that were coming up in your conversations? And this is an open question. You can answer individually or in groups.
Okay, Barbara, you want to go? Okay, you're muted though.
Yeah, I know. So we talk about, you know, the fact that probably a very generic instruction would appear through the chat. And so we talk about the fact that that could be, for instance, an input to, you know, specified with different students, their personal experience, or, you know, also cultural experiences, because, you know, what is a sandwich for me could be different what is a sandwich for you individually, but also culturally. So maybe to translate, let's say, these steps in a more specific context as an input for discussion. I see. Africana, is it okay? I did that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. If you, I mean, Africana actually made this point of culture that I think is very interesting.
Very good. Abdul, do you want to elaborate on the
Culturally, in my culture, we don't have sandwiches.
You see?
So now what happens in that case? But lately, the sandwiches, if you want a sandwich, then you're going to have a burger because of Burger King and McDonald's. They've infiltrated, so that's the only thing. The burgers are known as sandwiches, but other than that, nothing. We don't have sandwich culture.
Very good. Jose Antonio.
Yeah, we were discussing that in the cultural differences, but we kind of understood, and I think Rakesh already answered part of that question because he was in our group with Vaini as well. And so the one thing that I came up with for Portuguese is that the question is being posed as not as how do you make a good sandwich, but how does one make a good sandwich? And in Portuguese, those are two different questions. And therefore, if I'm going to make sure that this wasn't generated by ChatGPT, then it is I would like to see in the answer the use of the impersonal se, which is a protocol that is used when you are not directing the question to a person, but it's something that is impersonal.
Okay, so
that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, perfect. No, this is exactly the kind of stuff that I was hoping would be coming up in your conversations, right? So we definitely have culture as one of the themes that could be touched on with the help with the aid of ChatGPT. We have grammar. Maria Luisa, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Just thinking of what Barbara just said, I'm wondering, and this might be the next step you were planning to take, Simon, whether, since I've never touched ChatGPT, so I don't know how it works. But anyway, if each of us typed in different languages, if what we obtain is not a translation of what you got in English or variation of that, but really something culturally connotated, whereas in Italy too, we wouldn't have two slices of bread. We would have a panino, we would have a certain kind of bread and certain ingredients, in fact, that wouldn't, for instance, contemplate what was mentioned, like certain kind of condiments, etc., etc. So are we going to do that, Simon? Is that the next step, or should we do it on our own and then write a Google Doc?
So so the next step will entail working with ChatGPT individually. I envision it in English because that is, the most common denominator for all of us, but you're welcome to do it in Italian too. So, now that you have access to this tool, you can take it to where your imagination takes you. But let's go back maybe to the topic at hand, right? So we see how by facilitating this tool, we can talk about culture, we can talk about grammar, we can talk about language that is associated with very specific genres. Is there anything else in terms of how this could be utilized, what we could do with it, that has come up either directly or indirectly in your discussions? Chris, go ahead.
Well, in our group, we had an interesting conversation about how maybe you could, if you're focusing on like the language function of giving directions to somebody or using the imperative or using the infinitive, then you could have students generate something like this, and then they could take that as maybe a model or maybe a starting point, and then on their own write something else, or maybe transfer from a written to a spoken utterance. You know, it can be a useful way of just giving some examples of something, and then you build on that.
Right, excellent. Because if you notice, what was generated here is it's a recipe, right? It's a heuristic from step 1 to step 5. Everything is in the imperative mode. You know, how can we? Does it have to be that way, right? Can we use it to start thinking about different registers, as was mentioned already, or perhaps even, you know, different genres? And the next activity that unless there are any other hands up, let me see here. The next activity that I have here does exactly that. So it, you know, takes what we're doing, we're looking at one step farther, and you know, it is the same question, right? How does one make a good sandwich? And as Jose Antonio pointed out, that question can be phrased and formulated in different ways, and depending on the target language and culture that you're operating within. But it can also be a reflection of a genre. So let's say, you know, instead of asking the robots how one makes a good sandwich, let's see if they can tell us how one makes a good sandwich as a, I don't know, as a poem, or, and this is just an example. Write me a limerick on how one makes a good sandwich. Boom, just like that. Now, of course, limerick, right, is it's very specific for, you know, for English. But we can also extend that to, you know, other things. Let's say write a formal email explaining how to make a good. And I think with this prompt, we may be moving towards things that are, you know, a little bit more applicable, a little bit more useful, perhaps at a, you know, more advanced level, but not necessarily. Just gonna wait for it to finish. Oh boy, okay. That is a long email for a sandwich. It just goes. Okay. All right. So we have a very nice long formal email on how to make a good sandwich. What I would like you to do right now, and you can do it individually too, is to go back to your ChatGPT window dashboards and see if you can rephrase that command, that question. You know, you can use the sandwich prompt, or you can use something else in the target language or in English to reflect a particular genre. And this could be a genre that, you know, you perhaps analyze or, you know, work within with your students in your classes. And I do have a couple examples here. You know, I already showed limerick. You can do it with a poem, informal register, talking to a child, see if it can produce a horror story about how to make a sandwich, or, you know, perhaps an informal register, you know, whatever it is that you feel may be interesting and useful to you. So let's you know, let's take a few minutes to do that.
Simon?
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean by following this question or something else?
So yes,
Decide.
so you could follow that question that's already
Okay.
here.
Okay.
But you know, if there is something else that perhaps is more aligned with, with your own materials, maybe with what you're doing in your classes right now,
Okay.
feel free to use that too.
Okay, thanks.
May I ask you a question too, Simon? Because I was busy looking at a panino in Italian. And so how do you ask for, because then I asked for a panino in a sonnet, and you
Okay.
gave me a kind of panino as a sonnet. So how do you change the register? How do you give that input? What do you say?
So you could ask it in Italian, of course, to write me a sonnet on how to make a sandwich, or how to.
So I have to use all those words. Instead I do semicolon and it didn't get it. And now I know how to make a sonetto panino, which apparently is a Tuscan sandwich. Thank you, sorry.
There we go. I didn't know that.
If you want, I can send it to that, but it's in Italian actually. Although that's not an obstacle.
I see that Yuta made it write a haiku in English. Okay, that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, feel free to put your whatever, things your chat's generated in the chat box if you'd like, or raise your hand if you would like to share them out loud. Vaini has a question here.
Not a question. A remark.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so when Vaini wrote, when I entered in Dutch, it gave instructions with mayonnaise, which we never would use. But when I added to a child, it used butter. Bingo. Which goes back to a couple points that we've made before, right? Point number one is that despite the AI moniker, this tool is not intelligent. It sort of eats up all the data that it can have access to on the internet and, spits out whatever is most aligned with whatever users ask it for, right? So, of course, it's not going to know that you would not put that Dutch people do not put mayonnaise on the sandwich unless that is something that explicitly programmed, right? And that of course goes to the whole cultural aspect of language instruction and what it is that we can use this tool to sort of draw our students' attention to. There's a love letter. Great. Okay, so it's generating a lot of things. In terms of, genre exploration, in terms of register exploration, this is, something that we can definitely consider. I was wondering if, maybe already at this point, Barbara, go ahead.
No, I want just to say that I try to type, but it says that there is an error. So I have to regenerate the my question, let's say, and it says again that there is an error. I don't know why, but I will try later,
Okay, well, so yeah, these technical issues will happen from time to time.
Yeah, yeah.
Diana?
Well, so I mean, it got something with the sandwich. It was really elaborate in Spanish. But then I was trying to play with something more specific, and I asked it to create a poem about the experience of being a Latinx and using food for as a metaphor for the experience. And it started talking about arroz con frijoles and things like that. So interesting.
Okay, why was it interesting?
Well, because it's the kind of I thought that giving it something like this might make it more difficult, but it actually produced something pretty interesting, especially like if you're asking a student to do something like this, then the expectation is you're going to be surprised. No, it's like, oh wow, this is really good.
Let's put a pin in that. In the order received, Maria Luisa, you're next.
Thank you. So I asked for a sonnet and I got it there. Unfortunately, the rhymes were the lines weren't respected in the chat, but anyway, it got it wrong because the sonnet is 4433. It gave me 44333. A sonnet typically has 14 lines and mine had 17 lines. So I guess the Italians haven't started using massively ChatGPT and they don't have enough examples of that. I'm kind of happy that the
Right.
machine failed us.
And I know that you work with sonnets, right, in your courses. You know, given what you just experienced, how would you use Chat?
Simon, to tell you the truth, I work mainly with poetry, but not necessarily with sonnets. But
Okay.
what was the question?
No, the question was, and this could, you know, also go to anybody else who works with sonnets or other literary genres. How would you utilize this technology to explore these genres, to look at them with your students?
Yeah, I was trying to think it can be a lot of fun because certainly it engages the students. And so you can tell them do this and that as we're doing now. And then they look at it and they are exposed to a lot of language and they have to analyze it and to exercise some critical thinking and to get to know the vocabulary. So it can be a fun activity.
Jose Antonio?
Yeah, I had never explored this before, and it's I was told that it was amazing, and it is amazing. So I asked how does one make cheese balls, which is a Brazilian dish, and I asked it to do it in a horror story. It is an incredible horror story of how to make cheese balls. My God, this is very scary.
Okay. So yeah, so generate a horror story about a very mundane topic, and it did a good job, apparently. Is this something that you feel would be appropriate, would be applicable in your class? And if so, you know, can you think of some of the ways?
From last Friday, I was thinking, my first impression was, I guess because I'm old, this is not possible, that we now have to deal with this. But then after a while, I started thinking that we have to deal with it. And so I thought that one of the ways that you could do this is to, in order to use it in a positive way, it is to ask them to write whatever composition or whatever question you ask them to write about, to have them do it on their own and then on the ChatGPT and make comparisons. That is the only way I can think that I could use this.
Okay, so yeah, definitely comparing, contrasting either vocabulary or grammar or perhaps cultural references as a way of working with this platform. Chris, you're next.
Yeah, what Jose Antonio was saying and what Maria Luisa was saying in terms of kind of the creativity side of it, I think is pretty useful. And it kind of makes me think on a broader level that, you know, if you remember when Wikipedia first came out, we would always say, you know, you can look at Wikipedia as kind of a starting point, but you can't rely on it as like a resource, or really you can't cite it in a paper. And, you know, maybe ChatGPT is a good way to get some personalization or creative generation of language, but you can't really rely on it in a serious way. For example, this formal letter in Italian that I just wrote, as Maria Luisa said to me, or said to everybody, and as Barbara Spinelli said to me, you know, it's mostly right, but it still kind of sounds like a translation and there's a few mistakes. So it kind of gives you some fodder, but you know, you can't rely on it too much. So that's kind of my larger take on all of this.
Mm-hmm. So it only goes this far. It's not entirely perfect. Okay. Who's next? Joao, you're next.
Hi. It's just like a quick comment. What Maria Luisa said is I was listening to a podcast this morning, and it said that 50% of the knowledge is English. Of the GDP knowledge is in English, and the other 50% is spread out in all the other languages. So what happened with Maria Luisa, it's normal, I think, because it's still learning and it's going to grow. I mean, it depends on how we use it. And I was using it in my class yesterday, and we had to adapt because the answers were coming in continental Portuguese, and then I had to ask to change to Brazilian Portuguese. So it actually did. So it's an interesting perspective on how to use it, but it's just like to say that, yes, most of the knowledge is in English, and I think it's going to be like that, and it depends on how much we use it, and it's going to keep adding. But I thought it was interesting, like 50% is in English, 5% is in French, 3% in Chinese, and then the rest is spread out in the other languages. So there's not a lot of information yet for all of us, but it's a fun tool for classes, I think. But just really, I agree with Chris. It's yeah, but I think we can use it in different ways. I'm sorry.
Definitely. So yeah, so fun, motivating for students to use for sure. In terms of this pedagogical usefulness, right? We are arriving, I think, at certain conclusions here, right? So definitely, when it comes to culture, this automatically generated things can be used to highlight certain cultural differences, and show that, you know, and really zero in on them. Same for grammar. Same, I guess, for register. Who's next? Leira, you're next.
Hi. Thank you for all the input and everything. I wanted to share with you that I've been like talking with my students about ChatGPT, like just to let them know I know what it is and that is there. And as Chrisia said, it is like when we had Wikipedia, everybody was like, oh, and we had to double check that the information was correct. And we were all very aware. So every time we get a new digital improvement or something that comes to our lives, it has an impact on the educational people, obviously, the people that work here. And we have to find ways to use it in an interesting way. But something that my students told me today that I was really, really shocked is that many of them, out of 15, 5 said, I'm not going to use it because I don't trust it's going to reflect what I really know. And I said, well, yes, because the information is there. And they said, yeah, maybe the information is there, but the way I want to give that information, I don't think it's going to be able to do it. And I said, that's an amazing point. Then others were telling me that they were playing with the same prompt and then changing little words, or even the same prompt and getting different answers. And then we did a small thing that you give them a prompt that you prepare it, and you expect to have a false information there because you already prepare it. Like I prepare something, and now I know there is a false information that ChatGPT for whatever reason is given. So you tell the students the importance of double checking, citation, make sure that do the backward design. So you tell them, write a summary about the most important words of this author during this and this years, and a summary. And then they have to, in groups, make sure, double check with the tools we have, real papers, maybe interviewing people to find out if that information is correct. So it's like a kind of backwards design. That's very advanced. And in a less advanced way, approach or pedagogical application, the letter that you produced, the email, sorry, it is perfect to teach them about the structure, like paragraphs, connectors. How do we use connectors? Can you guys look at this email, could you replicate the email using at least those connectors? Can you find synonyms for those connectors? So we are like in the beginning of ChatGPT, I think, and I think the knowledge, I've heard or I read somewhere that they stopped putting new content, or the content is not totally updated, like it's from 2000, I don't know, 22. Simon, I don't know when is the, like, there are some things that are not still there or are not because of the load of people. But we could use it as a tool, tell the students that we are aware that exists, and try to play a little bit and enjoy, you know, technology, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Yeah, so so as later I mentioned, we begin to see how rather than being a new thing to contend with, a new, you know, menace that we have to address, this is something that could be very useful. This is something that we can make an ally out of for grammar, grammatical exploration, for cultural teaching, for vocabulary instruction as well. And all sort of these ideas lead us to inevitably to the next point, which I have right here. And here we go in case it didn't work. That rather than thinking about, you know, how do we do writing, right? Now that ChatGPT is here, right? Just to think about, okay, how we can redesign things, like how can we rethink the curriculum? Because after all, or our materials for that matter, because if, you know, if a task, right, can be answered or addressed by a robot, like, is it really good assessment of the learning process in the first place? And if it's not, then, you know, how can we make sure that we do our job, that our students are learning, and that all that can happen and can be done with hopefully the assistance of ChatGPT. Hold on, there's something in the chat. Okay, translated from English, right? Yes. So whatever it doesn't, so I can talk to that after we're done with the workshop. And so, you know, perhaps it is worth thinking about, as we already started talking about it last week, what is it that we can do with our curriculum? What kind of alternatives we have, you know, in our case, to composition proper, that would still give our students the resources and the knowledge, the skills to produce text in the target language. Some of the things that were discussed last semester were synchronous and asynchronous written platforms. There's Reddit, there's Discord, there's WhatsApp. You know, there are all sorts of platforms that, when cleverly scaffolded, allow you to have your students practice writing. But there are also integrated approaches, and this is just a suggestion. There's, you know, more approaches than that, of course. Integrated approaches is something that I think was brought up by Peter last week. And for those of us who were not here, I prepared a, you know, simple sort of exercise, an example of an exercise that can be used that sort of demonstrates that. So, you know, moving on with a sandwich theme, we can ask our students to watch a video, and this is an active hyperlink, on how to make a Vietnamese banh mi sandwich. Then in groups, they can discuss how that process is different from what they had described, well, now all of us described in the previous activity. As a third step, they can think about the just general cuisine of the language they're studying, and how does one prepare a sandwich, if one does it at all, in the target cuisine. And, you know, they can write out their short answers in class, and then at home, they can have robots generate the answer to that, and then, you know, write something contrastive about how that differs and why. And here, you know, this could be scaffolded for culture, it could be for grammar, for vocabulary, and so on and so forth. So this is more of an example of an integrated approach that merges in listening and writing, but of course, other combinations are also possible. And giving you this, and this is something that, at this point, all of you, know how to do after this workshop. I was wondering if, having seen this now, whether you can think of other examples of integrated approaches, similar or different, that you can do with your students that, may incorporate AI. If there's anything that you may share here.
So in the previous, and then that's it.
Alessandro, we cannot hear you at all. And before it was like just constantly interrupted.
No, I was in the previous activity, I created a dialogue in an elementary shop in Italy where you can ask for a panino for a sandwich, and I read an interesting dialogue, but with some mistakes that you'll never find in Italy. So a shop owner never asks you some questions when they make a panino in their shop, and it would be interesting to make a comparison with a video, or maybe with another activity where you see a real shop owner making a panino, and make a comparison on with the ChatGPT is saying. So it will be interesting to see the students should find the mistakes, the errors of ChatGPT.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely another sort of comparative exercise.
Yes, and about the dialogue, if you want to do it at an advanced level, sophisticated, this dialogue is terribly flat. It is really, it sounds as per the chat between Chris, Mario, etc., as a translation from English, but also it has no life in it.
And I think that's an interesting point to also, maybe like you said at the advanced level to bring up, right? It doesn't feel idiomatic. It's not lively. What does it mean? Why is it not lively? How can we, make it lively, right? Again, more advanced topics for sure.
Yes, it's also some point in the translation. So it's they say per accompagnare il panino. It's very deep. It's not so very common. So, and then they should say, okay, what do you drink? Not per accompagnare il panino. So they look like very weird translations.
Yeah, so a lot of again, we're going back to the issue of this platform translating a lot of things. That is something to be mindful of. Nicholas?
Big why in my head. I mean, I understand the fun part of this. Obviously, in Greek, it's too messy. It could only be an advance. It tries too hard to create language that is very high level. So even that is an issue. But the question is, beyond this being fun and wanting to be part of this, right? And I'm not talking about advanced. The advanced, I can think of a number of activities that could use. I also tried creating material that are specific so I can give to the students as reading. So it made my life easier if I couldn't find a paragraph that I wanted on a specific topic. It created it, and then I adjusted it. So it made my life easier in creating material. Other than that, I cannot yet see why. I mean, why I would use this as much in the classroom, even within its comparative use. Why would I give the students a wrong language generated by AI, for example, and then give them something that's authentic to compare? It seems like an interesting meta that I would do, and I do that meta more in more advanced levels, I guess. But why? If you thought of the why would we do this? I mean,
Right.
beyond the fun part or to show our students we know it, how is this helping with the production of speech that they want or their version of the language or anything related to that? It's a
Exactly.
question. I don't have an answer.
Right, and I think that this is the perfect question to sort of start concluding this discussion, and that is exactly where we started, right? Should we be afraid of this as language instructors? Like, what does the emergence of this technology mean for us? And it turns out that not much, really, at least not in its current state. It is a tool that is useful. Its usefulness is constrained in many areas. And in many instances, it makes sense to, not use it or to use it in a very carefully scaffolded way. Right. Abdul?
Yeah, I think what it's forced, from my point of view, it has forced us to give students more opportunity to write in class now.
Mm-hmm.
That's what is done. That's what I find, because more of them, even my own students, are saying, can we have exercises we can write in class here and not use these other tools and so on? Because they want to see what they can produce themselves, really.
Mm-hmm.
Majority of them want to feel like, oh, I can do this and I could be understood. I can read it. I can comprehend it. I know where I'm making errors, and that's what they want.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Maria Luisa?
Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay. The thought is that as long as English as a language prevails, the drawback of the use of something like this is really an anglicization of the languages of the world, because it's not exactly wrong, it's acceptable, is how my students write when they translate in their head word by word, even if I don't put it in a translator directly, but it's really that lack of flavor that corresponds to a language. So of that aspect, I'm a bit weird, because the result could be really homogenized response to things with an homogenized language that has different words, but basically is English translated, if that starts prevailing in schools. That's all.
Thank you. And Barbara?
Yes, I attended also the CTL forum last week, and not last week, I mean this week, I don't remember, no longer remember, but anyway, on Monday. And they say, of course, that these tools are developing, as also you said, Simon. And so this is, in this moment, you might have a response with more incorrect pieces, let's say, but it seems that they are working on that as well. And I think what is interesting was, listen to a creative writing professor who she talked about the possibility, at least for English, because, as we said, probably other languages need really to refer, as Chris send me a message about that, probably they don't refer to a corpora in Italian, but they translate from English to Italian, and it is pretty clear. But for English, for example, that I think it's the system has is more precise. They use, for instance, to create metaphors together, to compare and to start from them, from there, for instance. Or, for instance, they also said that, you don't have to take the test as it is, but then you have to craft and to elaborate it and to build on that piece of writing, for instance. So I think that the constructive way, I think is very interesting. It could be collaborative in the classroom. So I think that I understand now that, I think Nicholas is right when he says, why do we have to do that? Why do we have to correct, to compare something which is authentic to something which is not authentic and wrong? So it's a waste of time, honestly. But if the precision will be, better and better, for instance, the work that they are doing in the creative writing, I think it's interesting in terms of creativity. So the tool can give you some ideas, and then you elaborate these ideas and develop this idea or integrate these ideas. So I think that could be interesting. It's just that the creative aspect, but not correcting for fake and not fake. I mean, that probably is not.
Right. Excellent. I'm just looking at the clock here, and we are slightly over time. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide, which is going to be our calculator moment slide. And this goes back again to some of the things that we talked about last week, that just like the introduction of a calculator to the mathematics curriculum, the introduction of ChatGPT will most likely not change things in a way that we anticipate, at least not in a negative way. We've discussed how the tool could be used, if carefully, as a method to explore vocabulary, grammar, culture, highlight certain things in those dimensions. It is not perfect, it's getting better by the hour, but for the time being, this is, this is where we are. It also offers us an opportunity to rethink again our curriculum, our practice, and how we approach writing as such. And having said that, I wanted to thank you all for coming this afternoon. I hope that that was a useful event, and that you will take away some of the ideas from it, and if nothing else, that you've managed to play with this technology, see what it could potentially do, and that there's really nothing to be anxious about.